Welcome to everyone already on today's webinar. We're going to give people just a few more moments to. Hello, and thank you for joining our Sage Intacct webinar, latest updates in the Sage Intacct 2018 Release 3. I am Megan Manrique, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we jump in, I'm going to briefly go over how to use our webinar console. The orange arrow on the right side of your screen will let you toggle your control tray open or closed, and at the bottom of that control tray, you'll see a chat window. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time throughout the webinar via the chat function. We'll get to them towards the end during our Q&A for the webinar. And then additionally on your GoToWebinar console, you'll see an area for audio settings. If you're calling in through your telephone, please choose the Use Telephone option. And then alternatively, if you're using your computer speakers, please select the Use Mic and Speakers option instead. And lastly, I would like to note that today's webinar is being recorded. So if you'd like to send it to any of your colleagues who couldn't make it with us live today, or just review the content after today's live webinar, we will send out the slides and a link to that on-demand recording within about 48 hours. So definitely keep an eye out for that message. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. First up, we have Brenda, who is a senior manager on the Sage Intacct team here at Armanino. She has over 20 years of accounting experience in Big Four public accounting and in-house as a controller, where she led a Sage Intacct implementation for a large global nonprofit. We also have Irene, a manager on Armanino's Sage Intacct team today. Irene has over 30 years of accounting experience and has been involved in implementing accounting software solutions throughout her career. She's presented on accounting topics, accounting functionality, and business improvement, and has spoken nationally at conferences, including the Sage Intacct Advantage Conference. It's great to have you both with us here today, and with that, I'm going to pass the presentation over to Brenda to get us started.
Thanks, Megan. Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to cover some exciting updates in the R3 release. And we're going to cover the topics of spend management, the general ledger, the Salesforce CRM integration, otherwise known as the advanced CRM integration, projects, contracts, reporting and insights, platform services, as well as web services, global consolidations, administration, and more. First up, spend management. So this is one of the things that everybody has been waiting for ever since spend management was released. So spend management was released about 2 years ago for the purchasing module, and with this release, that add-on has now been extended to both the accounts payable and the general ledger module. So now, if you're not using the purchasing module, or if you have transactions coming in from other places other than the purchasing module that you want to enforce the budget on, you can now do so in both accounts payable and the general ledger. For those of you that aren't familiar with spend management is a tool that allows you to validate transactions, actual transactions that are being posted to your books against your budget. So if you run a tight budget, very common, especially for some nonprofits that may be doing grant budgets, as well as for other organizations that have to really keep a tight lid on spending, which is most of them, you can now enforce that. So the nice thing about that is you now have the option to extend it to those particular modules, and you can have slightly different settings for them. So you have the option to change whether it's stop or warn. So a stop transaction will not allow the transaction to be created if it's over budget. Warning will warn them that it's over budget, but will still allow them to proceed and post it. So also in this update, we've now got the ability to send notifications to the person of your choosing anytime you have warn selected and somebody elects to override that warning and continue posting the transaction even though it's over budget. So that's another level of control to help you rein in the spending there. One of the things I'm showing up here on the screen related to company permissions. So now that this is extended to multiple modules, you have the option to allow or not allow people to see the spend insight. And by that, it means to actually see that pop-up that compares your existing transaction to the actuals already booked, any committed spending if you have that option turned on against your budget. So with that, if you don't want somebody to have that level of detail, you don't have to give them the permission to spend insight. However, it still will be enforced. So if they are over budget, it will tell them they're over budget. However, they will not have the insight to be able to know how much over budget they are. They would then need to escalate that or reduce their amount until it went through for something lower than what they had originally requested. One of the suggestions that Intacct has made with the rollout of this to multiple modules is if you're already using spend management, you may want to consider creating what is commonly referred to as a threshold budget. So for example, if your budget is $10,000 for a certain dimension, combination, and account, you might want to set your threshold at $9,000 so that when you get it to warn, somebody exceeds the budget, but they haven't exceeded the real budget. They've only exceeded your threshold. That can be helpful if you have budgets that you want to be warned about before they actually go over budget. Okay, with that, General Ledger, over to you, Irene.
Thanks, Brenda. General Ledger, some new features in General Ledger. All right, I clicked the screen. Hold on one second. Let me see if I have control. Oh, there we go. Thank you. All right. Oh, and then it went twice. Go figure, right? Let me go back one. Thank you. All right, so General Ledger, user-defined books. If you're currently a user-defined book person, you've got user-defined books in Intacct, you're really going to like this new feature of being able to duplicate a journal entry to another book. If you have not used user-defined books before in Intacct, when you hear about this feature, it may intrigue you to want to learn more about user-defined books and maybe use those in your organization. So what this new feature does is it allows you to create a journal entry in one book. For example, you have a book set up called provisional books. You create an entry in those books, something that you want to test and see what the impact is going to be on your financial statement before you actually post that to your accrual books. So you can create a journal entry in your user-defined book, add that user-defined book to a report, right, to your financial report, review the information in the financial report, and if you like the entry, then you can go ahead, go back to that entry in your user-defined book, duplicate it over to your accrual book or your main set of books, and then of course you could reverse it off of the provisional book. So it's a really nice feature that gives you visibility into entries if you want to before you post them, or simply be able to duplicate between one set of books and the other. Setting up books. Here we go. Sorry, you guys, I had to get my mouse in control here. User-defined books. So setting up user-defined books is not difficult if you've never done that. You can just go in and add a user-defined book. There is a configuration setting that you turn on in the General Ledger configuration to allow user-defined books. Once you've done that, you can come in, you can add a user-defined book. User-defined books have their own set of journals, so you would set up a journal. And then in the reporting, as you can see here on the right, you can actually then go in and determine in your report if you're going to be looking at your accrual books, your provisional book, or you can even combine those in reporting. So nice feature as far as using user-defined books in Intacct. I'm sorry, Brenda. My mouse is just click happy here today. Back to you on.
Sure, no problem. So for contracts, this contract section, let me just go back one slide here. Annual billing frequency. So up until now, annually was not a billing frequency option. So they have now made it an option for you. So when used with the billing schedule, with the contract line level include with every invoice. So of course you have to opt in on the line level before you can rebill that. So that way, if you have, for example, some contract line items that are repeating every year and some are one-time only, you can elect on the line level that you're going to include it on every invoice for those annual recurring items and leave it off those one-time items. And just to call out, if your contract includes a partial year period, you can choose the full annual amount or a prorated amount, and that selection is for the entire schedule. You can't do that one on the line level. We also have an update related to billing renewals. So previously, when the system tried to renew a contract, it would error out if you had selected a renewal billing template that did not exactly match, or if it was greater than the child contract line terms. So now, for example, if you have an annual contract that you want to bill in quarters, you do have an option to select a shorter renewal term than the source contract term. So if you had a 3-year contract, you could bill it annually. So as long as your renewal term is shorter than the source term, you can pick any frequency you like. If the other call out is, of course, renew has to be selected, and the flat or fixed amount frequency needs to be set to use billing template on the contract line. So then the billing renewal template becomes required. So if you do leave that blank, the system will either default to the default billing template selected on the item or the billing template selected on the contract line. The billing template selected on the contract line will take precedence if one is selected in both places. Okay, so MEA enhancements. A lot of enhancements here, more flexibility to support a wider range of transaction use cases. So as they've been doing for the last 1.5 years or so, incremental updates to the contracts based on customer feedback. So if you were one of those customers that was looking for something like this, now you have the ability to add performance obligations in the middle of a contract. So previously, this was really cumbersome and complicated because of that reallocation of your revenue recognition between your obligations and also between the various periods you are recognizing revenue in. So when you create a performance obligation that starts at some point after the original contract, you're creating that uncovered period. So previously, this would create a validation message error that there was unallocated revenue not being included in your MEA allocation. So now, when you have a contract with either only one line item or you have added an additional line, what the system will do is it will post an entry on that date of the second time period, and it will reverse all revenue that has been recognized to date, and then it will repost the revenue that has been reallocated amongst the various performance obligations. So keep in mind that revenue schedule end dates and begin dates do not have to start or end at the same time, and now the system will automatically post those adjustments for you. Additionally, you have the option to have those adjustments be one time or distributed over the entire revenue recognition period. And lastly, the call out is because of these reallocations. If you have any MEA items that were a negative, like if you had any discounts or other negative line items, you will no longer be able to have those in these allocations. So if you do have them, the next time you go to post a revenue schedule for something that has a negative MEA item, you will get an error. So just to be aware of that, you will need to adjust that going forward. All right, configuring billing schedules. So the new option for the billing schedule is going to allow you the flexibility to record a contract now that's not going to start until a later date. So oftentimes people are signing contracts, let's say today, that might not start until 10/1, they might not start until 1/1. Depending on what your contract periods are and how early you need to renew them to make sure they're all executed on time. So what had previously happened when we introduced this in a release 2, the GL posting date field let you separate the contract line's booking date from the operational start date. So that you can account for the booking of revenue before or after the contract line, i.e. when the contract is signed. So when the GL posting date is early earlier than the contract line start date, this change required that the billing date start on the GL posting date, which meant people in many cases were recognizing revenue a little bit too early. So it does let you get the first invoice out as soon as the contract line books. So if you want to send that invoice ahead of time, but don't want to recognize the revenue, you now have another option. So when the contract GL line posting date is earlier than the internal billing schedule start date, if you select don't change the default billing schedule, it will post on that first date, generate the invoice, you'll be able to get that out. However, if you select the other option, the second option there, update the first schedule entry to post on the GL posting date, then you will be able to advance that to the next date when you want to actually recognize that revenue. So a little bit more flexibility if you have a GL posting date and a contract date that are going to be different, and you want to, it'll allow you to recognize the revenue for that first contract line on either date now. Okay, and here's just a few kind of smaller updates for contracts this time around. So you can now modify the term field to change payment terms as needed. So previously, once you had set up your contract, you were not able to modify the term. So if, for example, you had your first billing due upon receipt and subsequent ones due as net 30, you had no ability to change that. So now you do have the ability to modify the term as needed, either by billing period or just after that first one is generated. Also, there's been a bunch of enhancements to the UI to allow you to see more things. So if you're using the contracts module, as you're probably aware, you couldn't modify the view for those grid views for the revenue and the expense journals. So they have now updated those grid views to allow you to see the journal symbols. So you can now see the symbols and by default what books they're posting to, if they're posting to your 606 or your legacy books or to something else, making sure that they're posting the correct ones. And you can see that for also on your contract lines view, they've added the fields for billing status and delivery status in addition to the journal types and the journal billing status as well. And then lastly, revenue recognition schedules using the percent completion recognition will now fall under the same rules regarding the GL posting date as all other recognition methods. So what this means is, for example, if you say the GL posting date is July 15th and the revenue template start date is June 1st, and you are using a revenue template that's based on the project's observed complete table, you can enter in 15% as of June 30th and the applicable project's observed percent complete table, and then run your preview entries in the manage revenue and expense recognition page. So even though there's revenue that has been qualified to be recognized via percentage of completion calculation, the system will not display or schedule the revenue. So then you can run the preview entries as of July 31st, and the system will schedule the June revenue amount to post on the July 15th schedules and any July revenue to post on July 31st. So this allows you a little bit more flexibility there. And then each subsequent revenue amount will be scheduled for the revenue recognition schedule generation rules that you have set in there. So that's a nice thing, bringing that in alignment with all of the other RevRec methods. Okay, back over to you, Irene, for advanced Salesforce integration.
All right. Lots of nice little enhancements in this release related to the Salesforce integration. The first one there, simplified templates for different profiles. So you can now create these in Visualforce under your opportunity products. This is really for streamlining the entry of those opportunity products. The templates can reference all of the fields that need to be integrated, but you have the ability to hide some of those fields from the users so that they don't have to worry about those because those fields are already going to be included in the integration. So you can create these templates for different profiles of users and allow a user to have a specific template that has just the information on it that you need them to populate that's going to then be included in the Salesforce integration. The second one there, as we all know, in Intacct, contacts, there are several fields in a contact record that is required. And so now in the integration, they are mapped in Salesforce to make sure that the correct information is always talking between each other, between Salesforce and Intacct. So that's on the contact record. CRM, so now there are integration fields available for use with the Salesforce Process Builder. All right, so if you need to be able to integrate and you're using the Salesforce Process Builder to do that, the CRM integration fields are available in that process to use in the Salesforce Process Builder. A couple of other little updates that might be big to you. A multiplier field on the contract opportunity product line. They've increased that to 10 decimals. There is a filter login for the Sage Intacct mass synchronization tool. So it is now and rather than or, which is nice. So you can have that filter be and if you need to do something related to your synchronization. Annual has been added as an option to the billing frequency selector on Salesforce contracts. So that's a nice option for those of you that need that. Release 3.1 also had one other integration in it that we'll call out here, and that is you can now select the type of opportunity stage to be pre-populated when you create add-on opportunities in Salesforce. So in the past that defaulted to prospecting, but now you can select that in any of your stage values. So whatever value you want, you can select. You don't have to use the default prospecting one. All right, projects, Brenda.
Projects is you.
Oh, projects is me. Sorry, it's been a long day. Thank you. Projects, yes, of course. Projects, softbox checkbox for task. Softbook checkbox for task resources. Say that 3 times really fast. If you're using tasks in the project module and you're actually assigning resources to those tasks, you'll notice as the screenshot shows there in the bottom right-hand corner, you can check Softbook. So that allows you to indicate that this person is a resource, but they're still available to be used on other projects. All right, it does not affect reporting as far as in selecting resources, those soft book ones, you can still select them if they're soft booked. It doesn't stop you from selecting that resource. So it gives you 2 different options there. You can indicate somebody's full-time as you see there on the right, or soft book, and then in reports and in your selection of picking resources, you'll be able to see who's really booked and fully committed and those that are just a resource, i.e. soft booked on the project. Does not affect scheduling or the transactions. Observed % complete date validation. So this is new. The in the project tab, right? The second tab in the project module, the additional info tab, you've always been able to add an as of date if you're using % complete, observed % complete. Now there is a rule that's been built on that, and it must be in an open period. So when you first add this information, you'll have to make sure now that that as of date is in an open period in the projects module. All right, reporting and insights.
Thanks, Irene. This is a special update for all my nonprofit clients on the phone today. So as I'm sure you're aware, ASU 2016-14, otherwise known as Topic 958, is effective now. So it's effective for fiscal years beginning after December 15th, 2017. So if you're on a calendar year, you're nearing Q4. If you are a July 1st start, then it's effective for your 18-19 fiscal year. So in order to help you be compliant with this, Intacct has done a couple different things. So in terms of new account categories, they've added 4 new account categories: contributions in kind, contributions event related, contributions related organizations, and federated campaigns. So these categories are specifically added to help you with 990 mapping. So if, for example, you are not segregating out your event related or your related organization contributions, you may want to consider creating some new accounts and using these new categories to segregate that out so that you don't have to analyze those accounts when you go to do your 990 reporting. They're already going to be segregated out into how you need to report to the IRS. So that's some exciting things. In order to take advantage of the updates I'm going to be discussing in this section, you do need to be using the nonprofit quick start. So if you're not sure if you are using the nonprofit quick start, if you are implemented by us, you probably are. If you're a nonprofit, but to be able to check, you'll go to your company info tab, and it will tell you at the top there what version of the quick start you're using. So as part of this update, they are recommending if anybody has already implemented the nonprofit financial board book, so that came out in the release 2 just a couple months ago, or if you have installed the NFP dashboard, you're also going to need to make the updates to the categories on the right-hand side of the screen. So you will have already kind of had some group members, and you need to kind of reallocate things to be compliant with the 990 reporting. So there's the details on those updates you need to make on the right-hand side there. If you were installed or implemented prior to 2016, there's also, they did a big category refresh in 2016. So there may be other categories as well that you're not taking advantage of that you want to make sure to take a look at and see if it makes sense to separate your accounts as well. So these here are a listing of the 2 new dashboards as well as all of the reports that are available in this update. So you have all of these available for you already in your instance, and you can find them by going to My Dashboards or to Financial Reports and selecting the various library, either the Dashboards library or the Financial Reports library. So the pro tip here is that you want to install your dashboards first. And the reason why is a lot of these reports here are included on the dashboards, and by installing the dashboard first, it automatically installs all those reports for you as well. So you'll save yourself some clicking if you install the dashboards first, and then you can just install the few that will be left that are not already on a dashboard. So one of the call outs is that these reports are probably going to take a fair amount of tailoring on your part to have them, because of all the categories and the way Intacct is structured. They obviously have structured these reports for a specific use case. Every nonprofit is different. You're using dimensions in different ways, different things in different places, and obviously your chart of accounts and categories may be different than what Intacct has done as well. So if you would like some help in updating these, definitely reach out to us. But if you want to take a stab at it, they are available in there for you to go in and play around with and take a look at what those look like for you. So the compliance dashboard is a centralized view of required financial statements under the new guidelines. So it includes a statement of financial position, statement of activities, both direct and indirect cash flows, and your statement of functional expense. It also includes the 990 reporting worksheets, worksheet 9 and worksheet 8. So that can be really helpful. And then the disclosures dashboard is including your investments and liquidity disclosures as required under the new standard as well. All right, back to you, Irene, for platform and web services.
Excellent, thank you. One of my personal favorites as far as the new features in this release, and it has to do with smart rules, smart events, and smart links. I know that most organizations are using these in some way, but now Intacct has made it much easier for us once we need to either add a new smart event, smart rule, or smart link, or even editing an existing one. If you'll notice here, this is from the setup screen, is we now have a field lookup. So when you need to do a smart rule or smart event and you're putting in your condition or your requirement, you don't have to guess at exactly how that field should be formatted, what it's called. Once you click on that field lookup screen, it's going to take you to a screen called Get Merge Fields. This looks very familiar if you're used to doing custom reports. It's similar to the way Intacct does their custom reports in that the objects are there with the fields that you're used to seeing in the screen. And so you can just check which field it is you're doing your condition on and bring that in, and Intacct brings it in the correct format that you need for that condition. And below that, just as you see in the custom report writer, you've got other tables that are joined by a relationship with the table that you're writing the smart rule or smart event on. So a really nice feature to help us write those smart rules, smart events, and smart links and not have to worry about typing in the field information that we're doing the condition on. Nice new feature. Other things related to platform services, web services, so some new information here. Of course, you can always go to the developer site, Intacct, developer.intacct.com, and get a full list and read more information about this. We just talked about the field lookup for smart events, smart rules, and smart links. There is a new SDK for Node.js. For those of you that are techie people on the call, you'll know what that means. Company allows for queuing administration for offline jobs, so that's nice, and it prevents user deletion for improved audit trails. So some controls put around that in the process when you're using web services. There's a new status field that is used to deactivate web service authorizations. That's a nice one. That's in Intacct, of course, and so one of the changes that happened recently is that web service authorizations were segregated or moved out from the regular user setup, and so we set up our web service users, and so there is the ability to make them active or inactive. When they first rolled that out, there was not that capability. So now we can go in and make a web service authorization inactive. Warnings no longer block API calls. This can be huge. If you've got integrations, you've got some API calls, but you want to have a smart event or a smart rule that gives the user a warning but doesn't stop them from entering the transaction. You, of course, could always do that in Intacct, but in an API call, it would be blocked. So now your API call will work the same as Intacct, and it will ignore that warning and let the transaction actually go ahead and post. Cache management now allows for update and delete on other receipts. That's a nice new feature. Contract and revenue management, create MEA allocations, uncancel contract lines, and use contract renewal billing templates on contract lines. So some new things that they've added as well regarding the contract and revenue management via web services. Global consolidations, Brenda.
Excellent. My second favorite topic, other than nonprofit reporting.
That's right.
And I'm not even joking.
All right.
So I'm really excited about this. So I, prior to working here at Armanino, I worked for an international nonprofit. And this would have been really helpful for me. So this is now, Intacct is now allowing you to do decentralized consolidations. And they've always allowed you to do this, but it's been a little tricky because the only people who who are allowed to do consolidations are those that have access to the top level and have absolutely no restrictions on their user profile. So this has meant in most organizations that they've wanted to keep that to a very small number of people. So now if you have somebody, sitting out in the UK or France, you want to do a Euro consolidation, and they have access to all of the European entities as well as the elimination entity, they can now do a mini consolidation. So this is also helpful if you're doing roll-up consolidations. As you're probably aware, Intacct does not currently support those, so those need to be done offline. So if you have various people consolidating different regions for you, you now have the ability to restrict them to those entities and elimination entities that make sense for you. So this is now available. The elimination entities are now available on the user entity tab of the user record, so that you can assign people to those as well. So that's a great new feature there. The other feature in this release here is that you are now able to do advances at the top level. So prior, you were able to do advances at the top level. However, no, you weren't able to do them at the top level. You had to do them at the entity level in both entities, and that required you to manually post intercompany as well as your FX rates. So you had to manually calculate it and then post within each entity. So now with advances being made available at the top level, you can do it within the system at the top level instead of having to post it in both places. The only caveat here is that you still have to make sure that your base currency matches your transaction currency for both the advance and the invoice. So everything needs to match, but base currency, transaction currency throughout the system. So if your entities are not using the same currency, that might be an issue potentially still for you here. Okay, and then this one, so this is in the global consolidation section, because I didn't really know where else to put it, but this is going to be applicable to anybody that's operating in a multi-entity environment. So if you're using the advanced modules of order entry or purchasing, you have transaction definitions. So previously, if you had transaction definitions that you only wanted available to a specific entity, you had to create those at the entity level. Now you have the ability to create transaction definitions at the top level and then specify which entities are able to use it. So this is especially helpful if you've got folks that have access to multiple entities and they've got access to multiple transaction definitions. However, certain transaction definitions can only be used in certain companies. So this will now restrict it to be able to see that when you're in the entity. So the other nice thing about this is you can now specify different attributes per entity for certain settings. So if you wanted to use the same transaction definition at the top level for all entities, but you wanted them to have different sequence numbers, or you needed them to use a different document template because they had a different logo or a different address, you can now set that at the top level for each entity. So you can see I've got a screenshot up here of the different things that you can change to have available in various different entities. So a lot more flexibility now as to setting them up at the top level and controlling this, and maybe just having one transaction definition and controlling that kind of entity setting. Or if you have multiple transaction definitions because they've got different routing or different approvals or a different workflow altogether there, you can still make sure that that's only available to be used in the specific entities of your choosing. So somebody doesn't accidentally pick a transaction definition that shouldn't ever be used for a particular entity. So I know a lot of people in the multi-entity environment have been looking forward to this. So a lot of opportunities to switch that up a bit. All right,
Absolutely.
back to you, Irene.
All right, administration and more. some nice new little enhancements related to what we call administration in Intacct. So we talk about our users, creating and deleting users, a couple of changes there. New users cannot be created with an inactive status. So in the past, you were able to actually create a new user and mark them inactive so that they couldn't log in until you were ready to log them in. There were a lot of issues with that, and so Intacct took that option away. So now you cannot create a new user and make them inactive out of the box. You have to either make them active, or you can still use the locked out status, just an FYI there. If that is something that you used to use, you would set up a new user, making them active, do everything you needed to do before you actually made them active. You could still do that with the locked out feature, but you cannot use the inactive status. And users cannot be deleted if they have logged into Sage Intacct at least once. In the past, you were able to delete users if they had logged in, but they hadn't done any transactions, for example. You were able to actually delete them. That's not going to be the case anymore. So as soon as a user's been logged in, they will not be deleted, and you would have to make them inactive. We talked a little bit about this on the web services page. There is an active-inactive status field now for web service authorizations, which is actually a really nice feature, because that gives you the ability to make something inactive if needed. Queue administration object added to the custom report wizard. So in the custom report writer, that's an object that you can now choose called queue administration. The purpose of that is to get a report on your offline jobs and your offline job history. So when there's integrations happening and things are running offline and you want to know a little bit of information about the status of those offline jobs, the history of that, you can use this object in the custom report wizard to go ahead and see some of that information. So that's nice. You can use a system dashboard as your start page. In the past, if you did not have dashboards ready in Intacct and you had a new user, you could not give them the system dashboard as a landing page. So now you have the ability to do that. The system dashboard is available to be the start page or landing page for a user. If you're using one of those system dashboards and you want that to be the first thing that they see when they log into Intacct, you can now make that their start page.
And
so that's a nice feature.
One additional call out about that, Irene, is in addition to that one, I didn't have it in my section, but I should have. You now also will not be able to select a system dashboard as a default if it has not been installed. So previously, if there were system dashboards in there that had not been installed, you can still select it and would see it in your list. So now they do have to be installed first. So if you didn't install the system dashboard when you started, you can install it now and have that available.
Excellent. And I think you did note on a previous slide how to do that. You had this where you go in and install those dashboards.
Exactly. So along with the new nonprofit ones for everybody, every quick start package has at least one dashboard available in it.
Correct. So if you don't have a system dashboard, if you're not seeing it, you might go ahead and go look at that install dashboard area and install the system dashboard. Thanks, Brenda. Help content and training courses. Intacct is very, very passionate about making sure that they have really good online help. I truly believe that they do. I use the online help all the time. It really does have good information. So one of the things that they're doing is from here forward, any new release they will make sure that it is in sync in their online help. So if there's a new feature in a release, that you're going to find information about that in the help. So that's nice to know that there's going to be enough information in there on anything that's new in the release that will really help you understand what that feature is. They are also working constantly to expand and deepen the online help, and I've seen that actually a couple of times already. You'll notice in the screenshot there, in certain areas, Intacct will actually take you to a self-paced training course, which if there's one available for the topic that you're on, and that's through the Learning Center. So if you see a link that says self-paced training, you can click that link and it will take you to the Learning Center. You can log in at the Learning Center, and it'll take you right to the self-paced training related to that topic. So that is really nice. I've started to see that in quite a few of the pages in the help file, where they in fact have a self-paced training related to that topic. If you do not have a Learning Center login, it's really easy. If you just take and go to the link from the self-paced help, you can actually just register and sign up for the Learning Center. I would assume most of you probably have already done that, but Intacct makes it very easy to log in, sign up, register for the Learning Center, and then from within the Learning Center, there are lots of video tutorials, there are these self-paced trainings, and of course, there are the fee-based ones that Intacct provides, and you can register and pay for those training classes as well through the Learning Center. If you are an Amazon S3 user, this is good news because they've allowed you to upload permissions. So there's a new field added in the screen where you do your cloud, cloud storage, thank you, where you do your cloud storage for Amazon S3, and there's in the bucket there, it allows you to put the bucket owner only or authenticated users. So you have the ability to pick and choose who can see that when it uploads to Amazon 3. Note, of course, that that does not go back in time. It's only from here forward. So you'll want to go in, if you're using Amazon 3 in your cloud storage, you'll want to go in there, change that setting and have a default in there, and then know which one you prefer when you're uploading from Intacct to Amazon S3. This is an important one if you're an American Express person using the integration with Amex and Intacct and you do the check delivery. Email address is now required when adding new vendors or editing an existing vendor marked for Amex check delivery. So in the past, it would give you a warning, but it would still allow you to create the vendor record. Now you actually have to go in and make sure that you have an email address on the vendor record. A reminder there, in a vendor record setup, there are two email addresses. There's a primary email address and a secondary email address. The primary email address, you can only have one email address. In the secondary email address, you can have multiple email addresses, and those can be separated by a comma. The reason I wanted to call that out is at this time, Amex does not use the secondary email address. So if you are using that feature and you like that secondary email address, just know that at this time, Amex is still not integrating and pulling in the secondary email address, just the primary email address. They're also implementing billing limits for Amex vendor payments. So here they are listed on the screen. If you're doing Intacct check delivery, you can only have 25 bills per payment. If you're doing ACH or the Amex credit card, corporate card payment service, you can have up to 125 bills per payment. So some limitations there related to Amex that they're implementing as to the number of bills that can be included in one particular payment. Wells Fargo Payment Manager, if you're using that feature, they are no longer going to support that in the AP Workbench Outbox. So where you have the Outbox option, if you're using that Outbox feature, that is not going to be available in Wells Fargo Payment Manager. If you've got that integrated with Intacct, you'll have to go directly to Pay Now. So that is something they're taking away. All right, so in conclusion, we've covered several things in our webinar today. Some good information from Brenda on the spend management. It's a wonderful module in Intacct. I know that if you're using it, you like it, and those are really good enhancements to that. If it's something that you're interested in, of course, you can always reach out to us and we can share more information. General Ledger and some of the things that we can do in General Ledger, including those user-defined books and being able to duplicate from those user-defined books. Some Salesforce integration enhancements, projects, a few things in projects that allow for more control on resources in doing your projects and making sure people are available. Contracts information, reporting information that we talked about, platform and web services. Brenda talked a little bit about global consolidations, and then of course those handful of ones that are we talked about in administration.
Thanks, Irene. So now actually we do have a few minutes for the Q&A. So if anyone does have any additional questions that you'd like to submit now, feel free to send them in. We've got a few here already, so I'll start with the ones that we've already got. So Brenda, I think this one's actually for you around the spend management section that you mentioned. If you select spend management for GL, do you have to have a budget for balance sheet accounts?
That's a good question. So they have set this up so that you can actually limit the general ledger posting to a specific account group. So our recommendation, of course, would be to limit it to your expenditures group so that you're only enforcing it against the expenditures, not against like your cash account or your prepaid account. But if you do have accounts that you are budgeting for on the balance sheet, you could create a group that included all of your expenditures and then maybe your fixed asset accounts if you wanted to have spend management enforce against that. But it is going to be controlled by an account group that you'll create or use an existing one.
Thank you. And Irene, actually, I think that this one was one of your earlier sections. Can you have more than one user-defined book?
Great question. Yes, you can. You can have several user-defined books in Intacct. You create each user-defined book, and then you create journals related to that user-defined book. Several clients that I've implemented, our Menino's implemented, utilize user-defined books. The example that we had in our session today was a provisional user book where you're mostly using it for reporting. You want to do some entries and you want to test those entries, see what the impact is on your financial statement before you actually post that to your accrual books. Some other examples that I've seen it implemented for is I've actually had clients set up what they call a payroll book. So they wanted more details in Intacct for their CFO management team, right? And so, but they didn't want the payroll details to be in their accrual books. So they actually set up a payroll user-defined book and have details in that user-defined book. And of course, those aren't visible to standard users that are just looking at the accrual books. So different uses for user-defined books, and absolutely you can have more than one user-defined book.
Great.
Yeah, like a few other examples of some additional uses for user-defined book would be if you're a nonprofit, conditional grants or conditional donations to be able to track those in your system, purchasing commitments to be able to do reporting on those, or if you're doing any non-standard or non-GAAP transactions. Like I've had a couple clients that want to show pay down on debt on the P&L because nobody ever looks at the balance sheet. So they want to show it that way for management reporting, but of course for GAAP, they want to do it the correct way. So those are some additional uses you might have for user-defined books as well.
Yes,
Great.
excellent. And one thing to note about that too is when you open it, if you've never used your user-defined books and you turn that functionality on, it's not only available in financial reports, but it's also available in the standard report. So you can run a trial balance or a general ledger on just your user-defined book, just your accrual book, or you can combine them and run them together. So nice functionality around the user-defined books.
Well, thank you both. That actually wraps up our Q&A session for today. So if you do have additional specific questions after you've reviewed the webinar again, or just things that you think of, feel free to reach out to our team. You can contact Irene or Brenda directly. Their contact info is up on the screen, but as I mentioned earlier, today's webinar was recorded. So we'll also get you a link to the on-demand recording as well as a link to the slides. But feel free to reach out to any of the Menino team members that you know, or of course Brenda and Irene directly. As you exit today, there is a quick survey, so definitely take a moment to let us know your thoughts on today's webinar, and if you have any ideas for future webinars, we'd love to hear them. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you.